Hi everybody. Today I'm making a video to explain some of the principles surrounding ethics in engineering and how you can apply those ethical principles to your projects and also your future careers. So, why consider ethics? You're going to be making a lot of decisions as engineers and in your careers, and you should know that it is your responsibility to think about all of your decisions carefully while considering the possible outcomes of your actions. You should think about these considerations in terms of how your actions will affect other people and whether or not they follow an ethical code. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of those ethical codes or frameworks that are introduced in your engineering communications textbook. I'll give you some tips on developing a framework for yourself as far as an ethical code, ethical framework. I'll mention a note on industry codes of ethics and how to use those. And then a final note on critical thinking. So some of those ethical frameworks that are included in your textbook, there are many others, but this sort of gives a historical account in your textbook of some of the major movements in ethical codes of conduct that might apply to engineers. So the first one mentioned is Aristotle's virtue ethics, and balance is really the key word there. Balance between self-interest, what appeals to you or what is good for you, right? And the interest of others. What is good for other people? And in this ethical view, those may be at odds, but you should work towards a balance between thinking about yourself and thinking about others, and that's an ethical framework. Then John Locke came along, so these are historically, this is a sort of historical timeline. John Locke talked about human rights, right, and rights ethics, and the idea that all people should have certain rights, such as rights to dignity, and that ethics should be guided by the fact that everyone has these rights and they deserve these rights. John Stuart Mill then talked about utilitarian ethics. Okay, just simple utility, you could say. What benefits the most people? What gives the greatest benefit to the most people, regardless of any negative implications? Okay, so these systems are, they've been considered by a lot of philosophers, and none of them is really in place today, but they help inform our way of thinking about how ethics decisions could be guided. They're potentially quite a bit wrong with any one of these, right? Ayn Rand's self-realization ethics. And in that ethical framework, she just really said everybody puts themselves first, so you shouldn't have any qualms about just putting yourself first. That's also an ethical framework. You could probably think of some others, right? Perhaps ones that are closer to your heart, or ones that make more sense to you for various personal reasons. So rather than going back to any one of those old historical ethical models, I want to encourage you to think about creating an ethical framework that really does match up with your own personal goals and beliefs. When you're considering your ethical frameworks, you want to ask some of the following questions, including, is the ethical system coherent and meaningful enough to guide action? So am I thinking, oh yeah, I want to be good to other people. I mean, that's a good thought. It's a good ethical foundation, but it's not a whole ethical system, right? Because you want to be able to be it to be coherent and meaningful enough, specific enough to guide action. And of course, being kind to others does guide action in a lot of ways, but potentially you'd want to expand on that. Does the system help me to distinguish what is most important from less important considerations in decision making? So is there a prioritization process indicated in that ethical system? And then, is the ethical system true and consistent with my own values and priorities? So if you're going to choose an ethical system to abide by, it really does make sense that it feels true for you, You want to find something that rings true for you and that is meaningful to you personally. Then we can also talk about industry codes of ethics. These are less optional, right? These are codes of ethics as engineers, perhaps as scholars, that you are going to have to abide by in order to be successful and in order to participate in meaningful ways in an engineering community, a career cohort. Some of these ethical codes are developed because they enable you to mitigate your risk and limit your liability. So for example, if you abide by a system for testing products that has been vetted or researched and proven to have been effective and is used by many people and is considered ethical by many people, and in the case that it goes wrong one time and someone gets hurt, you have effectively limited your liability because it wasn't just a system that you thought up yesterday and that sounded good to you, but rather is something that has been agreed upon and researched by many other people. And so that limits your personal liability in any wrongdoing that or harm that may have occurred because of one mistake or one instance. The IEEE Code of Ethics is printed on your syllabus, so hopefully you have seen it. You might choose to go and look at it and familiarize yourself with it again. That's something that we're going to be bringing up in class and something that you should be using because you will be expected as an engineer to know this code of ethics and to make sure that your decisions do match up with that code of ethics, again, to limit your liability personally, and also because you are contributing to a community of engineers who have agreed upon this ethical code, and as a participant in that community, you are agreeing as well. I wanted to bring up a few other types of ethical codes that may affect your work. For example, codes of ethics in medical fields, if you're working on medical devices, are going to apply to you as well. A common medical doctrine or medical ethical doctrine is do no harm, right? That's one of the ancient Greek ethical codes for the medical field. And so you really want to do everything you can to make sure that no one is harmed, especially if you're working on a medical product. The Oregon State University Code of Ethics also comes into play. There are policies that guide ethics that are dictated by Oregon State University, and you can also check those out on the Oregon State University webpage. So some final notes I wanted to make sure and touch on, because ethics is really a matter. Thinking about ethics is really only effective if you're thinking critically, or thinking about ethics is critical thinking. As you think about your design and your collaboration with your team and your coworkers in the future, using these critical skills is going to be extremely important to be able to make decisions intentionally that are viable, that can be supported, and that limit your liability, and that also align with your personal value system and that of your teammates. In many cases, you're going to want to identify specific issues as you're thinking about applying ethics to your project. Thinking about whether someone, a specific person or group, is disadvantaged or advantaged by a decision you're making may be an important question to ask. What different types of powers are at play in your decision? It goes along with the question of whether someone is advantaged or disadvantaged. Usually, one group or person has more power than other people, and you want to pay special attention to any decision that you might make that might make people or groups who have less power in a situation more vulnerable. Any assumptions that you might be making about what the best outcome or action to come from your decision will be, you want to just identify what those are. And you may want to question those because they may be assumptions that you've made without looking into them about, for example, what the best outcome of a system or a project might be. You might be thinking that the best possible outcome might be to benefit a specific group of people, and you might have left out another group of people. So you just want to inspect that outcome and consider the other options. And then what rules or policies should guide your actions? That goes back to those industry codes of ethics. Finally, how can you treat others most respectfully and fairly as you go about decision making for your project and for your career? This probably reflects a little bit of my own thoughts about ethical codes, and something that I think should go into play. If you want to insert a different consideration there for yourself, go right ahead. But I definitely recommend considering how to treat others respectfully and fairly as one important ethical tenet that you may want to incorporate. All right, so that's all that I have for you in this video. We'll talk about ethical codes more in class, and good luck working on your projects.